Welcome to this session, the students and learners of PG Diploma in Sustainability Science. I need not introduce myself. Most of you had attended my session day before yesterday on Tuesday, and Dr. Kumman, your program coordinator, had already introduced me. So continuing with the series topics under your MSD 013 socio-cultural system, further under indigenous knowledge system. Today for the next few minutes, we are going to highlight the salient features of the topic called ecological balance and Indian ethos. A brief introduction. Environmental pollution is not a new phenomena, but may be traced back to the evolution of the Homo sapiens. Who are Homo sapiens? The erect human being, standing straight like you and I. Homo sapiens on the earth, and it was realized 25 years ago, even in ancient Greece, in the time of great Greek philosophers like Plato and Socrates. In the process of transformation or metamorphosis of primitive man into a civilized man, what all happened? Overall, environment was neglected, importance was given to science and technology, and the overall impact or effect was resulting in environmental pollution. When human being was roaming in the forest, he knew neither good nor bad. And we are talking about very, very primitive human being. At that point of time, he didn't have any knowledge of shelter, cooking, speech, or industry. He did not need his fellow creatures and didn't have any desire to hurt them or hurt the surroundings. Thus, when man was uncivilized, therefore he was unpolluted, it was said that nothing was more pure than the state of nature. It's a very common phrase in English today, state of nature, pure and pristine, without any pollution. And nothing was more polluted than man in the state of nature. Now we are coming to the subtopic, environmental jurisprudence, ancient and medieval period of Indian times, Indian history. Now, what do you mean by jurisprudence? It is the legal system, theory of law. Now, India being a pro-socialist and a secular country, it has had a good environmental sense, and environmental sense has been one of the fundamental features of Indian philosophy. The civilization of India has grown in close association with nature much more than it has happened in the Western world, in the Western civilization. To preserve and protect the nature, human being must make sincere efforts. Ecological imbalances and environmental destructions are good examples to say that human beings failed in his duty voluntarily to take compulsory action to protect the surrounding environment from being polluted. It is this process of human negligence and carelessness dealing with the environment gave birth to environmental jurisprudence. So this overall centuries of process of environmental degradation due to civilizational, urbanization, and industrialization process, there had to be some mechanism to handle the desiccation of environmental resources, and thus how we see the birth of environmental jurisprudence. So there has to be some law regarding it. India has been rich not only financially but also intellectually. Now let us see what all has been happening. The scientific knowledge which we now discovered is not new for India, even to talk about pollution. So we have had known about pollution for a very long time historically. Since development and degradation, progress and pollution, economics and environment go together hand in hand, Development cannot be stopped as it is being a natural instinct of man. In spite of the fact that degradation, that development and degradation, environment and economics, they all go together, and therefore progress and pollution. Even then, it is our natural instinct not to stop so-called the industrially oriented or scientifically oriented development, which definitely has a bearing on the health of natural environment. The examples are the air that we respire, the emits, the odor that a man emits, etc. And industry is the other cause for pollution. And if industry is the necessary evil, then pollution is the surest effect of it. The pollution is an unsolved problem, which has been termed as quote unquote slow poison, as is as old as human civilization itself. So the pollution is as old as human civilization itself. The instinct of protection of environment is inherent among the Indians, which motivated them to lay down certain religious precepts and rules and to take corresponding measures in an attempt to protect environment. The significance of environment and environmental protection are as old as the first empire in India, the Mauryan Empire, the Mauryan time, 2nd century BC. It is traced to 300 BC or 2nd century BC, as I said. The principles of environmental protection are found in the famous text Arthashastra, supposed to have been composed and written by Kautilya, the prime minister in the court of Chandragupta Maurya. Arthashastra deals with environmental protection and lays down various rules minutely with great detail. Arthashastra mentions that rulers have the basic duty to protect, preserve, and improve forests and animal species, that is, protection of wildlife. Killing animals and birds, cutting trees are forbidden. And if any harm is caused or pollution is caused in the city, then penalty is prescribed in Arthashastra. Now, can you tell me, students, that why? See, at every point of time in history, by every point of time, I mean there are historical moments, there are historical phenomena that why at that point of time, Arthashastra, you may have this impression, oh, there was plenty of forests, plenty of natural resources, minerals and stones. Even then, why Arthashastra is talking about it? Why Arthashastra is talking about environmental degradation and pollution? This is because for the first time, a political setup called a state was being carved out in ancient India. The Mauryan Empire is the first empire, the Magadhan state, with its capital in Pataliputra in southern Bihar. Therefore, the extensive cultivation and deforestation along the Gangetic banks led to a kind of a scenario in which there was a lot of depletion of natural resources. But at the same time, they were dependent on the resources of the forest, such as wood and elephants, two most important natural resources that the Mauryan Empire exploited out of the natural environment. Similarly, they used to extract a lot of minerals, a lot of mining work, a lot of stone being quarried as far as Karnataka. So that's how the trade routes and routes of communication opened between northern India and parts of Deccan and southern India. So therefore, there was a very much sense of environmental pollution, desiccation, and environmental protection became a concern of the state. That's how we find its mention in Arthashastra. What did it say? Even if the wild animals from forest are seen where people live, no, the forest villages, as they say, they shall not be killed or inflict injury to them. They shall be driven out. So there is no need to kill them if they are seeing around the human habitat in the forest villages. They should be driven out. They should not be harmed. During the period of Ashok, one of the most well-known emperors of India, as such, not only of ancient India, and well known all over the world for his policy of Dhamma, which is a code of conduct, a moral conduct, in which a lot of rules, regulations, and observations regarding the natural resources can be seen. He is famous for, uh, locating his messages all throughout the highways across the length and breadth of northern India up to Afghanistan, parts of Afghanistan, through his pillar edicts and major rock edicts. His fifth pillar edict famously lays down that killing different species of animals and birds which are harmless, which are of utility, are not to be eaten. He even put in the fifth pillar edict, you can pick up any book on the Ashok's Mauryan dynasty or the Ashokan India, that on certain days in a month, he put a ban on the killing of peacocks and hens and all if in the royal kitchen. The royal kitchen should not have all these meat on certain days. So kind of a the concept of sacred grove, that on so and so day, these animals and birds cannot be uh, touched and should not be cooked for the sake of food. For instance, on full moon days, deforestation must be prohibited. No cutting of forests, no felling of trees. The forests maintain ecological balance. They are reserve of food and to sustain cultivation. Particularly, the forests sustain cultivation on hilly areas, and it produces products of medicinal plants. Let us remember that. Coming to late medieval India, Chhatrapati Shivaji, the famous Maratha king, the Maratha warrior leader, he also prophesied, or he also promoted the no injury to animals and plants. Plantations were made by the roadsides to help travelers to have rest. Same thing happened as early as the Mauryan times. You can read in the Ashokan pillar edicts that there were rest houses, there were big trees to give shades to the travelers, to the merchants, to the pilgrims, to the mendicants. On the highway, waterworks were erected to help the travelers. Similarly, Chhatrapati Shivaji also went for plantations all along the highways and the roadsides to help travelers to take rest. He commanded the people to protect forests and preserve the water resources without polluting. Right? So both forest and water resources had to be reserves had to be protected. This was the concern of the Maratha Empire. Despite of all ancient wisdom, with the development of science and technology, environment has continued to be damaged and ecological balance has been disturbed. To control these ecological imbalances and to protect environment, India has developed a form of environmental jurisprudence which is unique. Now, let us come to the historical analysis once again of uh, the Indian law, and I would request you to skip the next two slides as there is a repeat I can see. Three slides, in fact, up to Shivaji has been repeated. Sorry for these typos. Okay, now let's come to Hinduism. Now we will be talking about the provisions in the South Asian religions, which are also known as world religions, to begin with Hinduism. That what are the provisions or what are the concerns in our ancient and medieval religious scriptures and practices to do with natural environment. Now, Hinduism is one of the ancient religions of the world. As cosmology began with Thales in the Western world, the Vedas, cosmology began with the Vedas, the Vedic literature in the East. Both the texts declare water to be the original being of reality. Fire is considered as the life principle in the Rig Veda. and defines as immortal light in mortals. Going back to water, water is supposed to be the originator of life. That's why at times you get to hear that fish is our ancestor, because fish appeared first in water as a life form. So is fire. According to Hindu religion, God and nature are not different aspects, they are one and the same. The different aspects of nature are worshipped. For example, plants like tulsi, we know it is equated with Lord Vishnu. Trees like people is being worshipped on, like on Saturdays, and on Saturdays, then like there are shivlingas which is installed at the root of a huge people tree, and the shivlingas are being worshipped. And I have seen, since I used to be till the lockdown, a visitor to a temple where the Lord Saturn is being, invoked. I have seen lot many people, lot many visitors on Saturdays to the local temples in Delhi. They pour water at the people tree, because it is believed just not worshipping the god Shiva, but Lord Saturn is also being propitiated, is also being pleased when you pour water at the root of a people tree. So there is, they really worship trees as equivalent to gods. Birds like Garuda, which is the vehicle of Vishnu, and animals like lion, which is Devi Durga ji's, transport or vehicle, lion, are being worshipped. In Hinduism, environmental ethics are a part of religious philosophy from the Vedic period onwards. In Rig Veda, the Panchabhutas, what are the five basic elements of life, of human body and on the earth? What are these? Earth, these are all natural resources. Earth, air, water, fire, and space. That is the sky. Provide basis for life, and nobody shall destroy or damage these five elements. According to the Indian spiritual tradition, nature does not need to be controlled, transformed, or decorated. She needs to be accepted in her entirety, in its originality as a whole. The Vedas, or the Vedic culture or the Vedic civilization, considered the five elements, that is the earth, air, water, fire, and space, the Panchabhutas, to be gods. These five elements as equivalent of gods. They are supernatural powers. The earth is described as Mother Goddess. I may remind you from your school textbook knowledge, you may remember that the first civilization in South Asia, which one? Harappan civilization or Indus Valley civilization, has thrown up uh, tablets and terracotta figurines in which Mother Earth is being depicted as a goddess. She was being worshipped 2,500 years ago, or more than that, 3,000 years ago almost. So we see that as far as uh, even pre-Vedic times, the Indus Valley civilization, people worshipped the earth, the plants, the plantation, all related natural environment as Mother Goddess. And I would like to mention, even before Indus, there is a settlement today in the Pakistan called Mehergarh. It is at the confluence of Balochistan and border of Balochistan, and almost it goes up to Iranian tract, where mother goddesses have been unearthed, and they definitely had deified the earth. They had deified vegetation, deified agriculture into the concept of a goddess. Coming back to Atharvaveda, one of the last Vedas in the Vedic period, it provides that earth at times is mother, at times is father, and product of Antariksh or sky. So everything has been, as being, and will be created due to earth. So earth has continued throughout thousands of years of our civilization to be worshipped as a goddess, and sometimes also as a father, but more popularly accepted as mother goddess. Coming to water, as I said, that water contained the first form of life on this earth. The fish was the first life form. Water is the source of all living beings and strength of earth or cause of the earth. Cause of the earth. Water may also be called Jivan or life, as said in Chandogya Upanishad. Upanishad is again Vedanta, Upanishadic literature. Vedanta, what does Vedanta means? The end of the Vedic literature or end of the Vedic period. So the last of the Vedic literature, we consider the Upanishads. So Chandogya Upanishad mentions water as a concept of life and considered Varun Devata as representing Varuna. Varuna means water or Jal. Varun Dev as the god of the water world. And today, Ganges is being worshipped as Ganga Mata. Actually, this is the time, first week of June, you have the worship of goddess Ganges. Thousands of pilgrims, they walk on foot to reach Haridwar to do this huge puja of Ganga Mata with lot of funfair. Coming to air. Air is the source of energy. It is treated as Vayu Devta. Very interesting. If you remember the cult of Bajrang Bali, which is so very popular across northern India, he is supposed to be the son of Pavana Suta. Pavan means air, right? So Suta means son. This is a Sanskrit word, and he is the son of Anjani Mata. Mother is Anjani, but father is Vayu Devata or Pavan Devata. He is the son of air. Fire. Now coming to fire. Fire is considered as life principle in Rig Veda and may be prayed as Agni Dev or Surya Dev. And as far as fire is concerned, I would like to mention this culture of Havan, which is still being practiced by Hindus on sacred occasions, auspicious occasions in your family. In the Vedic times, why this Havan or Yagga, the entire concept or culture of yagna came up. It was considered that when you put all the stuff for the worship of A, B, C gods, fire was the courier. Fire was the carrier or the courier god to carry all these offerings that you offered towards the specific god that you were worshipping, and for him that Havan or Yaga was sacrifice was being performed. So air has played a very important role in our civilization, in religion and culture. The forests are rich source of natural energy and act as balancers of the ecology and are upheld or are being worshipped as Vanadevata. I would like to tell you that across the centuries, the forest in different tracts of South Asia, in India in particular, have seen lot of local goddesses coming up there. So there are, besides that concept of sacred forest that I was mentioning on Tuesday, there are a lot of local goddesses which have come up in the intersections of many trade routes within the forest, and including the village goddesses. So these are part of the forest culture, our minor goddesses in particular, something that anthropologist Mackin Marriott said, little traditions. The trees and plants were worshipped as they symbolized the various attributes of God. So far we have seen that. For example, most of us are familiar with the goddess Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, and who is represented with the lotus flower. Banyan tree is attributed to Brahman, the concept, the creator god, the Brahma. People to Vishnu, people is also worshipped when a Shivalinga is kept there for Shiva. And as I said, people pour water to the people tree in worshipping Saturn god on every Saturday. Fig is attributed to Rudra, which is the aggressive form of Shiva. Tree is Briksha Devata. Briksha means tree, means plant, and Briksha is a Sanskrit word. And Briksha Rakshati Rakshitaha. This is a Sanskrit phrase, one who protects trees is being protected. Varaha and Matsya Puranas. The Purana period, you can say, from the Gupta period, that is 4th century to 5th century AD, and Puranas go up to, up to 10th, 12th century AD. The Varaha and Matsya Puranas regarded planting of trees as auspicious activities and treated one tree is equal to 10 suns. Very, very interesting. See, we were so environment conscious people. In the Puranic period, that is early medieval period, much before even coming of the Mughals, we are talking about pre-15th, pre-14th century, that one tree was equivalent to 10 suns. So what does it mean in actual terms? It means that, whatever the strength or the attributes of 10 suns can give a parent, can also be given by a one huge tree. And therefore, those who plant trees, the concept went, they will not go to hell. So they will be doing punya if they plant, and if they plant trees, and they will get the benefit of 10 suns if they plant one tree. Atharva Veda speaks about protection of wildlife and domesticated cattle. So as old as Atharva Veda's time, we have the not only the domesticated cattle to be protected for the sake of your economy, subsistence economy, but also the wildlife in the forest had to be protected. Among the ancient scriptures, the Chandogya Upanishad has explained interrelationship and correlation between human beings and environment. The ancient rishis, the big monks and the saints have revealed. I'm giving you a quotation, and the quotation begins now. God sleeps in minerals, wakes in animals, and thinks in man. Unquote. What does this mean? God sleeps in minerals. Since the minerals, stones, they can't talk, so God is sleeping. God is there. God is there in everything, in every being. And let us not think that minerals do not have their life. So God sleeps in minerals, wakes in animals. Whatever the stage of consciousness in which an animal is born, so it is, God is there in an animal in a awakened stage, and thinks in man. So what does it mean? That when it comes to intelligence and intellectual activity, God is manifested through man. He does all his activities, the God, and thinks through man. Earth is the essence of nature. Water is the essence of earth. Vegetation is the essence of water. Human life is the essence of vegetation. Meditation is the essence of human life. Recitation, essence of balance of harmony, is the existence of human beings in totality. So this is the sum up of our Hindu traditions in the scriptures. Once again, Atharvaveda says that whatever I dig out, that should quickly grow over again. O God, let me not injure that vital heart. So for my sustenance, I have to plant, replant, uproot, so I dig out. But that should quickly grow again. So it should be replenished. There should be plantation. The principle, this ancient Indian principle, is similar to right to life with environmental sustainability. Thus, principle of sustainable development is not evolved recently, but it is established a principle in the Indian civilization since the Vedic times. The three main Vedas, Rigveda, Yajurveda, and Samavedas, they do highlight the importance of yagna, as I said, the concept of what is called in Hindi havan, because it helps in purifying atmosphere. Purity and quality of water is also highlighted in Atharvaveda. It is being believed that when you lit a fire, right, it is supposed to be purifying the atmosphere. In what way? It is supposed to kill the germs and the bacteria surrounding you, your house, your habitat, or whatever you are lighting that fire. And that's how the concept of Havan has a very, very scientific background to it. Now, coming to Bhagavad Gita, the famous text of the Hinduism or the Hindu culture, Lord Krishna says, tells Arjuna, I am the essence of water, the brightness, I am the light of sun and moon, sound in the ether, the heat or temperature, and the light in fire, and prana or life in all creatures. So what does Arjuna say? I repeat, I am the essence of water. I am also the brightness and light of sun and moon, sound in the ether, the heat or temperature, and the light in the fire. So I am also the heat, temperature, and light in the fire, and prana in all creatures. So what does it mean? Krishna means the God. So God is presence in every natural resources, including human beings. He continues to say, Krishna, I am the universe and nature. I am the purifier. I am the sun. I am rain. I am life and death. I am the origin and existence and the maintainer, and also said, I am the people tree among trees. Because Krishna is supposed to be an avatar of Vishnu, as we said few minutes earlier, that people tree is equivalent to Vishnu as well. Manu Smriti and Yajnavalkya Smriti. What are the Smriti literature? The legal literature, the commentaries on the ancient Indian law, and Manu Smriti is still being quoted in many of the modern India legal cases. Now, Manu and Yajnavalkya Smriti is also stress on the importance of environmental protection. And the Smriti literature is little later, but not as late as the Mughals, but they continue to add on to themselves till the 19th century. Yajnavalkya Smriti and the Manu Smriti continued to build upon themselves. Manu Smriti mentions about the optimum use of natural resources, that is one of the principles of sustainable development, not only through Puranas, Vedas, and Itihas, but also through various stories and writings. And thus, Hinduism has been protecting the environment. It also conserves environment and imbibes in the people the principle of sustainable development. Coming to Buddhism. Now we will take up very, very briefly Buddhism, Jainism, Judaism. Buddhism also respects the norms of ecology. They are forbidden to cut trees. You know, they're very, very compassionate, much more than a practicing Hindu. A practicing Buddhist, we know, much more non-violent and much more compassionate towards life. So, respects norms of ecology. They are forbidden to cut trees, destroy animals, birds, or pollute water. Universal compassion, non-violence, love, and service, and mutual protection are all attributes of Buddhism. Jainism, we all know that non-violence more strictly is being adhered by the Jainas. You know, the very conservative Jains, they do not eat food after the sunset. Why? Because they believe if they open their mouth, they will eat, therefore they will kill the microorganism which will enter into their mouth. And you may have seen the Jain munis or nuns with a, like what is called today mask in pandemic India. They put a piece of cloth on their mouth. Jain scriptures preach not to endure, abuse, or oppress, enslave, insult, torment, torture, and kill any creature or living being. Ahimsa is the Jain way of life, and for them, environmental harmony through spirituality may be attained by adhering to three precepts. What are these three beliefs? Right belief, right conduct, and right knowledge. Lord Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, says that nothing is so subtler and smaller than an atom, and so vast than space, and no quality is more subtle than the quality of non-violence, and no virtue is greater than reverence for life. He profoundly declares that those who neglect the five elements, that is, fire, earth, air, water, sky, and vegetation, neglects his own sustenance. So those who do not care about these panchabhutas and vegetation, they are actually destroying their own sustenance. Sikhism. In Sikhism too, divinity lies in nature, and to meet their needs, they should without exploiting the nature. Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism, you would be knowing that this is the ancient religion of Persia or Iran before the arrival of Islam. One of the oldest religions on earth, founded by Zarathustra. Zoroastrians are more conscious of nature, not only in their words, but also in their thoughts and deeds. They have reverence towards nature's gifts, air, water, earth, fire, animals, plants, and related material. Christianity. There are biblical verses in Old and New Testaments which provide that it is the duty of man to protect nature and humanity must safeguard or care for the environment. Christianity prescribes a harmonious relationship between man and nature. Coming to Islam, the Holy Quran's message is unity, harmony, balance, and order, representing the sustainable development. One should not alter the environment or disrupt the balance. If any such damage is caused to environment, it is considered as fasad. आज कहते हैं ना, in today's Hindi language, you say danga fasad. Fasad means it will create disorder. God is owner and man is the guardian of all creatures. Allah has created nature, thus destruction of nature is injurious to Allah. Quran reveals that those who damage nature excessively, destruction of Allah takes place and therefore they are oppressing themselves. Judaism. Jews are much more concerned for the environment. The foundation of Judaism is safeguarding the living creatures. Jews regard humanity as the custodian of the world and warn them not to destroy the world. If done, there will be no one to set it right. The fundamental Jewish principle is to preserve, protect, and safeguard the environment. So we see, of all, Hindus have had a lot of faith in their spiritual and cultural traditions and principles, and all these traditions and principles within South Asia have influenced the medieval philosophy of the Bishnoi cult or Bishnoi culture, as well as Chipko movement in modern India. Now, very briefly about the Bishnois of medieval Rajasthan. I have published a paper on the Bishnois of Rajasthan in my second book. You know, it was a philosophy. For them, dharma meant nature. For them, dharma did not mean daily religious rituals. It was an offshoot of the Hindu community and founded by Guru Maharaj Jambhoji. And his main teaching was to ban the cutting of trees, killing of animals or birds, as well as conservation of water resources, which is the most scarce resources in the in the desert economy, in the third desert. We are talking about the district of Bikaner, Jodhpur, and Jaisalmer, where the Bishnois flourished. And later on, the local states of Jodhpur, Jaisalmer, and Bikaner, they gave charters to the Bishnoi villages that if anyone can kill the local, wildlife or cut trees, they would be punished. There was a royal injunction. But initially, there are famous stories that 300 and this is not only a story but historically documented that when the soldiers of Jodhpur Maharaja had come to cut the khejri trees. Khejri tree, by the way, is the lifeline of a desert. Khejri trees can survive in the severe drought, severe famine conditions. So there were 363 Bishnois, followers of Guru Jambhoji, who sacrificed their lives as they hugged Chipkot, as they hugged the trees when the Rajput soldiers were cutting the trees. So this is an example of an early satyagraha for environmental protection, and it became hugging the trees and sacrificing life became an inspiration for the Chipko movement under Dr. Sundarlal Bahuguna in the Tarai region of the Himalayas, which began around 1973. It happened initially among the villages of UP, but later on became popular in the villages of the Himalayan region. And it forced the contractors not to cut the trees. And since then, Chipko movement has become almost a co-terminus with eco-development movement, co-terminus with protection of vegetation. Coming very, very briefly to the Gandhian perspectives, Mahatma Gandhi said that environment was the repository of human spirit. He warned about the consequences of industrialization and urbanization. He tried to re-establish the Indian culture as it was in the pre-colonial times, the ancient tradition. But due to the mesmerism of science and technology, no Indian really cared about what he was talking about. To him, India's backbone was village. An ideal village had to have a very protected natural environment. He initiated Swadeshi movement. And Swadeshi movement also we know that everything has to be locally manufactured, locally produced and locally marketed. So Gandhi laid a lot of emphasis on nature, natural resources, its regeneration, its conservation and protection for the benefit of a community at its local habitat. Gandhi Gandhiji's remarkable foresight and ability to go to the root cause of ecological problems told the need of the poorest should receive the topmost priority in the development planning. It helps sustainable development. Gandhiji stated quite clearly that greed of a few people and their tendency to pursue a highly affluent and wasteful lifestyle, basically the urban lifestyle, was going to prove very destructive to the nature. As he said, I quote him, the earth has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed, unquote. Organizations like UNO also felt the need to have coordination between development and protection of environment, and this led to legislative urges. Laws had to be made. The development leads to industrialization, urbanization, which in turn leads to pollution and environmental degradation. Thus, we see that environment is an all-encompassing term, and there has been more appropriate time to consider environmental law than now. Globalization and technological innovations have changed the industrial composition, typically from resource and agricultural based industries to heavy industries, high tech manufacturing, leading to a massive environmental change. Nature is always tolerant and productive, but the heavy disturbances cause ecosystems and unlimited extraction of natural products made nature intolerable. As a result, man developed concern for the protection of environment in the name of environmentalism. Today, we are concerned with the following list of environmental issues. Negatively, because of human activity. I'll go on reading it very little fast. Climate change, to do with global warming and other related issues, conservation, genetic erosion, Holocene extinction event, dams, environmental impacts of dams. You all remember the most famous case study of Narmada Bachao Andolan led by Dr. Medha Patkar. Energy conservation, renewable energy, efficient energy use, genetic engineering leads to genetic pollution. Intensive farming leads to overgrazing, irrigation, and monoculture. Land degradation leads to desertification, land pollution, soil erosion, and so forth. Nanotechnology leads to nanotoxicology, nanopollution. Nuclear issues, nuclear power, nuclear fallout, nuclear meltdown. Overpopulation, urban sprawl has to do with issues like land for burial, excess consumption of natural resources. Ozone depletion, greenhouse effects, pollution, air pollution, noise, light and thermal pollutions, water pollutions, and so on. Ocean dumping, oil spills. There has been so many international events to do with oil spills. Resource depletion. Exploitation of natural resources, environmental effects of fishing, mining, deforestation, illegal mining, which is so rampantly done across India. Waste disposal incidents. And, there was a case few years ago only in which the chemistry department in Delhi University was indicted for dumping some waste products in an industrial area in South Delhi, and it led to all kind of uproar and a legal case FIR was lodged. Toxins, finally, chlorofluorocarbons, DDT, dioxins, heavy metals, toxic waste, herbicides and pesticides we are all familiar with. Coming to environmental ethics. Environmental ethics employs concepts from the entire field of philosophy. We are talking of jurisprudence, law, so it has to do with environmental ethics, especially aesthetics, metaphysics, epistemology, philosophy of science, social and political philosophy. Environmental ethics is the discipline that studies the moral relationship of human beings and also the value and moral status of environment and its non-human contents. The early development of this environmental ethics as a discipline had to do with connection of deep ecology, social ecology, attempt to apply traditional ethic theories including consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics. The approaches of man towards environmental ethics are of two kinds. One is ecocentric approach, that is natural resources based approach, and the other is anthropocentric or homocentric or man-centric approach. Ecocentric approach is considered to be a broad approach where the environmental quality covers the entire ecosphere. In this approach, nature has to be viewed and respected. Therefore, ecocentric ethics has concern for the whole ecosystem, unlike the anthropocentric approach, which is devoid of ethical content. So we are going to conclude now very briefly. We see that broad changing weather patterns, the expected burden of caring for environmental refuges, the effects of consumerism and the health decline associated with various forms of pollution continue and pose major problems for human beings themselves and raise crucial issues about the environmental justice. At the same time, continuing destruction of natural environments and the widespread loss of both plant and animal science species, widespread loss of both plant and animal species pose increasing problems for other forms of life on the planet. With that, we complete the session this afternoon. Thank you very much for your listening, patient hearing. So could we have some discussion if one of the scholars would like to ask?